Her true story, from Michigan. They charged me rent to stay in the home I built, so I called the sheriff and changed the locks. They laughed when I packed, but they cried when they saw who owned the deed. Mom, you're lucky we're only asking $600 a month. You're not exactly Airbnb material. You should be grateful, and if you are grateful, you should help us clean the house. An old maid like you deserves it. That was what my son said to me, standing in the kitchen of the house I built with my husband. He slid the rental agreement across the counter like it was a dinner menu and not the eviction of my dignity. My name was still barely dry on the lease line when my daughter-in-law chimed in from the living room. Her voice coated in faux sweetness. We figured this was the fairest way, just to make sure everyone's contributing. I did not answer right away. I looked down at the papers in front of me, then up at the chipped tile on the kitchen wall. Tile I laid myself, back when my knees did not ache and my hands were steady. 40 years ago, my husband and I dug the foundation for this home with our own backs. I picked out the windows, hammered the fence posts, planted the first rose bush out front. Now I was being asked to pay rent to live in it. After my husband died, I moved in with my son and his wife, thinking it would bring us closer together. The house was big enough for all of us, and I thought they'd appreciate the help. I cooked, I cleaned, I even babysat their kids when they still lived here. I thought we were a family, but slowly, things changed. First, they asked me to move into the smaller room for privacy. Then they started labeling food in the fridge with their names. Eventually, they stopped including me in dinner plans altogether, telling me they were eating out or already ate when I asked. And then came the talk about utilities. We're just stretched thin right now, my son said one evening. Groceries, electric, internet, it all adds up. I understood that. I offered to help out. I handed over my monthly Social Security check to cover groceries and bills. But apparently that was not enough. A week later, he brought me the lease. I was to pay $600 a month for housing. No discussion, no warning, just a statement of fact, like they were doing me a favor. I did not argue. I did not plead. I did not ask why my own child had reduced me to a line item in their budget. I just stared at the paper, my hands resting on the kitchen counter that still had the burn mark from when I scorched the Thanksgiving gravy pot 2 decades ago. I asked one question. Is this your idea? I looked at my son, waiting. He hesitated. It's just something we both talked about. We, of course, meant his wife. I nodded. I went to my room that night and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I ran my fingers over the photo frames I had brought with me. The wedding picture, the family vacation to Mackinac Island, the birthday parties. Every memory suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. I thought of my husband, of how hard we had worked to give our only son a home, an education, a future. How we skipped vacations and pinched pennies so he could have the best. How we built this house, one nail at a time, so he would never know what it meant to be without shelter. And now, I was being charged to live in the shelter I gave him. I felt like a guest, no worse than a guest, a tenant, a liability, a woman whose value had expired. The next morning, I signed the paper, not because I agreed, because I needed time. Time to figure out how far the rot had spread. Time to see if the child I raised was still somewhere inside the man who had handed me a lease to my own home. But inside, something cracked. It was not anger, not yet. It was something quieter, heavier, a realization. They did not see me anymore. Not as a mother, not as a builder, not even as a woman. They saw me as a bill. As I slid the signed lease back across the counter, my son gave a tight smile and said, "Thanks for understanding." I nodded, but what I thought was this. This is the last time you hand me paper and expect me to sign without reading every line. And that was the beginning. Not of the end, but of the reckoning. It started with the heat. The nights had turned colder. Michigan cold, the kind that bites through your skin and settles in your bones. I went to the thermostat, like I always had, and turned it up a few notches. Not to anything extravagant, just warm enough to stop the ache in my knees and keep the frost from creeping under the door. The next morning, I found a note on the fridge, handwritten, in my daughter-in-law's stiff, slanted script. "Please don't adjust the thermostat without asking. Electricity isn't free." I stood there for a moment, holding my cup of tea, rereading the note 3 times to be sure I understood. That evening, I waited until my son got home from work and asked him, gently, quietly, why I needed permission to heat the house I had helped build, the house where he had taken his first steps, the house where I had rocked him to sleep through fevers and nightmares and broken hearts. Before he could answer, she cut in. Just because she gave birth to you doesn't mean she gets a free pass for life. The words hit like a slap. I turned to her, expecting some trace of regret on her face, some flicker of realization at how cruel that sounded. But there was nothing. No shame, no hesitation, only calculation. She went on. We're the ones paying the bills now. If she's not contributing more, then she can't just use whatever she wants. I wanted to scream that I had already handed them every cent I had coming in each month, that I cooked their meals, cleaned their floors, folded their laundry, that I asked for nothing except dignity. But I said nothing, because I knew now this was not about money. It was about power. They wanted to make it clear. This was not my home anymore. I was not the head of this household. I was not even a guest. I was an occupant, subject to their rules. Shortly after that, they moved me into the smallest bedroom in the house. It used to be a storage room. No windows, one outlet. They called it cozier. They even put a curtain up instead of a proper door. My bed barely fit between the walls. The dresser I brought from my old room was left in the hallway until they could find space. I lay awake that first night in the dark, curled up in a blanket too thin for the drafty walls, and realized something terrifying. They were erasing me, not with cruelty loud enough for neighbors to hear, but with quiet shifts, one after another, like a tide that pulls you out to sea before you even realize you're drowning. I was not allowed to cook anymore. We're doing meal prep now. I was told not to use the washer during the day. Rates are lower at night. I had to ask before inviting a friend over, just so we're all on the same page. Every request was cloaked in politeness, but every one chipped away at who I was. And then one morning, I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. She should have thought twice before giving us the house and expecting a free ride after, my daughter-in-law said to the neighbor as they stood outside the front porch. That sentence stopped me cold. Giving them the house? I had never given them anything but trust. That night, after they went out to dinner, I crept into the garage where we kept all the old documents. There was a plastic tub marked house papers. I remembered putting it together myself the year after we paid off the mortgage. I opened it and started digging. Tax records, repair receipts, old utility bills, but no deed, no certificate of ownership, no will, no insurance, nothing with my name tied to the property. I opened every folder, checked every envelope. My fingers shook, not from age, but from the rising panic in my chest. The deed was gone. The last proof that this house still belonged to me was missing. And that was the moment I understood. This was not just about control. They had taken something, and I was going to find out exactly what. She should have thought twice before giving us the house and expecting a free ride after. That is what my daughter-in-law said to our neighbor, loud enough for me to hear from the window where I was watering the dying fern they kept forgetting to care for. Her tone was casual, even cheerful, as if she was just stating a fact. I do not know what was worse, the words themselves or how lightly they seemed to come. The neighbor mumbled something polite in return, probably uncomfortable, but the damage had already landed. Gave them the house? The memory came rushing back in a cold wave. 2 years ago I had fallen ill, nothing too serious at first, but it worsened quickly. I was in and out of the hospital, tests, bills, confusion. My son had sat beside my bed with a clipboard and a smile that, in hindsight, felt too rehearsed. "Mom, just sign this," he had said. "It's just temporary, to give me legal authority to handle the mortgage and property stuff while you recover. You'll still be on everything. It just helps with the bank." I had signed. I had not read it closely. I had trusted him. He was my son. That document was the turning point, and I had not known it. Now I was standing in my own kitchen, my name no longer on the deed, being talked about like a squatter who had overstayed her welcome. They had taken advantage of the moment when I was weakest, when I was too sick to read fine print, when I just wanted to focus on healing and not on legal jargon. I had been a fool, but I had not always been a fool. Before I was a mother, before I was a wife, I was a clerk for a family law office. I knew how paperwork worked. I knew that every transaction left a trail. And, more importantly, I knew that if my name had ever been on that deed, truly on it, there would still be a record somewhere. They could not erase me completely. So I started looking. Not in the house. I already knew they had cleared that out. No, I went to the courthouse in town, a building with faded flags and tired staff who still remembered to be kind to old ladies who asked questions politely. I requested the property file. The clerk, a woman in her 40s with sensible shoes and kind eyes, pulled it up. I gave her my ID. She asked if I was a party to the property. I believe I still am, I said, and I was right. There it was, a deed from 1984, signed by me and my husband, declaring joint ownership. Then another document, more recent, transferring half the interest to my son and daughter-in-law, marked as temporary custodianship due to medical incapacity. But one line stood out. The original deed had never been revoked. No one had ever removed my name. I still held 51% ownership of the property. I asked for a certified copy of the file. The clerk printed it, stamped it, slid it across the counter. Would you like us to notify the other parties of the access request? No, I said calmly. They'll find out soon enough. I stepped out of that building with the papers tucked tightly under my arm, and for the first time in 2 years, my spine straightened, just a little. They thought I was just a frail old woman who did not understand legal language, but I had built this house, brick by brick, and I had kept the receipts. I did not announce anything. No speeches, no confrontation. I simply started packing. A few clothes, my old jewelry box, the framed photo of my husband in his Navy uniform, the Bible he gave me for our 10th anniversary. I placed everything gently into 2 suitcases I had not used in years, the kind with worn wheels and zippers that still remembered better times. I did not bother with the rest. Let them keep the furniture. Let them sleep in the bed I once bought with my first bonus check. Let them sit on the couch I picked out when my son graduated college. The memories were mine. The objects were just placeholders. I moved quietly from room to room, folding and stacking, thinking not of what I was leaving behind, but what I was reclaiming. That afternoon, as I wheeled my bags through the hallway, my daughter-in-law caught sight of me. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a crooked smirk on her face. "Well," she said, voice sweet with venom. "Looks like she finally got the hint. Took her long enough." She did not ask where I was going. She did not offer to help. She just watched with the kind of satisfaction that comes when someone believes they have won. My son came down the stairs as I reached the front door. He paused. His eyes met mine, but they were empty, distant, as if he had already decided I was someone he no longer had to care about. He did not say a word. I opened the door myself. It was not a dramatic exit. There was no storm, no slammed doors, only the quiet click of my suitcase wheels on the front porch as I walked away from the house I had built. But I did not go far. In the next town over, nestled between a hardware store and a diner that still served bottomless coffee, was a small brick building with an American flag out front. The sheriff's department. I stepped inside and gave my name. The young deputy at the desk looked surprised. "The Ruth Gardner?" "Yes," I said. "And I need to speak with the sheriff." He came out 5 minutes later, taller than I remembered, but with the same gentle eyes and crooked smile he had as a boy when I used to babysit him. "Miss Ruth?" he said, startled. "It's been years." "It has," I smiled. "You used to call me Auntie Ruth when I brought cookies to the station." He laughed, then gestured me into his office. "What can I do for you?" I sat down and laid the documents in front of him. The certified deed, the ownership transfer record, my ID, the letter from the clerk confirming my status as majority owner. Then I told him everything. I told him how they moved me into a storage room, how they made me pay rent, how they took my name off the mailbox and acted like I was just some freeloader clinging to a house I had no right to. I told him how I found out I still owned more than half the property. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the papers, scanned them with practiced eyes, and let out a long breath. "Well," he said slowly, "if this is all accurate, and it sure looks like it is, then what they're doing isn't just disrespectful. It's illegal." I looked at him. "So what does that mean?" He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "It means if you're the lawful owner, and they're refusing to leave or attempting to charge you rent, they're occupying your property without consent." In plain English? He smiled, then said the words I had been waiting to hear. "If you're still the rightful owner, they're trespassing. Cow traro." And that was when I knew I had not just walked away from my home. I had walked toward justice. Power does not always come from raising your voice. Sometimes, it comes from holding the right piece of paper. After my meeting with the sheriff, I contacted an attorney. I chose a local woman named Hannah Givens, a sharp, no-nonsense professional who came highly recommended by the courthouse clerk. She had a reputation for being calm in the courtroom and ruthless on paper. I met her at her office on a gray Thursday morning. Her handshake was firm. Her eyes were direct. "I've reviewed the documents you sent," she said, flipping through the certified copies I had brought from the clerk's office. "You have every right to pursue full control of the property. The current occupants are not just overstepping, they're legally vulnerable." I nodded, feeling the weight of every insult, every silent humiliation, settle just a little lighter on my shoulders. "We'll begin with a petition for reinstatement of property rights," she continued. "It's clean, efficient, and it won't require court appearances unless they contest it." "I don't want them to know it's me," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "I want it handled through the trust," I added, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. "It's an old trust my husband and I set up years ago for property taxes and future estate planning. The name on it is neutral. They won't recognize it." Hannah smiled. "Smart." I signed the papers that afternoon. Petition for repossession, affidavit of prior ownership, declaration of current occupancy dispute. She notarized each one, placed them into a manila folder, and said, "This will be submitted first thing in the morning." The next day, the sheriff's office processed the request for a residency check, citing property ownership conflict. The wheels of justice began to turn. A week later, the district court approved the initial petition and issued a formal notice of disputed ownership to the occupants, my son and daughter-in-law. The document stated that unless they could provide evidence disproving my retained interest, they were required to vacate the premises or face formal eviction proceedings. They still had no idea who was behind it. To them, it must have looked like some kind of clerical error or legal technicality. But I knew better. This was not revenge. This was restoration. I watched the process from Hannah's office, tracking each filing, each stamped envelope, each confirmation of receipt. My hands did not shake, not once. When she handed me the final form to sign, the formal complaint for unlawful occupancy, I picked up the pen, placed the tip on the line, and wrote my name. Not as a mother, not as a victim, but as the legal, rightful owner of the home I built with my own hands. I did not cry. I did not smile. I just signed, because justice does not always shout. Sometimes it signs, and it does not flinch. It was a quiet morning in early spring, the kind where the wind still carried a bite, but the sun was starting to return. I stood across the street from the house, my house, wrapped in a dark wool coat that belonged to my husband, the same one he wore when we first moved in. It still smelled faintly of cedar and memory. The sheriff's cruiser pulled into the driveway just before 9 a.m., followed by my attorney's car. The engine barely shut off before they were at the front door, official papers in hand. I watched from the sidewalk, still, silent, and unseen. The knock was loud, measured, official. My son answered in sweatpants, confusion already on his face. "What's this about?" he asked, blinking in the sunlight. The sheriff unfolded the document. "This is a legal notice of property repossession. You and your wife are being asked to vacate the premises within 48 hours due to unresolved ownership claims." My daughter-in-law appeared behind him in her robe, eyes puffy, voice sharp. "Excuse me, what the hell is this? This has to be a mistake." "It's no mistake, ma'am," the sheriff said, calm but firm. "You've been notified. You had 14 days to respond. You didn't. This is the enforcement phase." "Who filed this?" she snapped, her voice rising. "We own this house. Who the hell is doing this to us?" I took my cue. I stepped off the curb. The sound of my heels on the pavement was the only sound in the world for a moment. My coat moved with the wind. My hands were steady, my breath was even. They saw me the moment I reached the edge of the driveway. My son blinked like he could not believe his eyes. My daughter-in-law's mouth fell open, mid-rant, but no words followed. I said nothing at first. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. From it I drew one paper, just one, the original deed. My name. My husband's name. My portion, 51%. I held it up without trembling, then I looked at them, directly, for the first time in months. "The woman you charged rent," I said softly, "is the legal majority owner of this land." They were frozen. "No one took it from me," I continued. "No one tricked me. You tried, but you failed." You can't do this," my son whispered, his voice breaking. "I already did. I replied. No anger, no shouting, just truth. The sheriff nodded beside me, then handed them the second page, the final order. You have until Friday to remove your belongings. I turned and walked back across the street without looking back. I did not need to see their faces again, because this moment, this silence, was louder than anything they could ever say. It was a quiet morning in early spring, the kind where the wind still carried a bite, but the sun was starting to return. I stood across the street from the house, my house, wrapped in a dark wool coat that belonged to my husband, the same one he wore when we first moved in. It still smelled faintly of cedar and memory. The familiar scent clung to me like the echo of an old song, one we used to hum while painting the porch together. The sheriff's cruiser pulled into the driveway just before 9 a.m., followed by my attorney's car. The tires cracked gently against the gravel, as if even they knew this land deserved respect. The engine barely shut off before they were at the front door, official papers in hand. I watched from the sidewalk, still, silent, and unseen, like the ghosts they had tried to make me into. The knock was loud, measured, official. It wasn't just a knock, it was a sentence. My son answered in sweatpants, confusion already on his face. His hair stuck up on one side and he rubbed his eyes like a child too slow to realize the rules had changed. What's this about? He asked, blinking in the sunlight. The sheriff unfolded the document. This is a legal notice of property repossession. You and your wife are being asked to vacate the premises within 48 hours due to unresolved ownership claims. My daughter-in-law appeared behind him in her robe, eyes puffy, voice sharp. Excuse me? What the hell is this? This has to be a mistake. It's no mistake, ma'am, the sheriff said, calm but firm. You've been notified. You had 14 days to respond. You didn't. This is the enforcement phase. Who filed this? She snapped, her voice rising. We own this house. Who the hell is doing this to us? I took my cue. I stepped off the curb. The sound of my heels on the pavement was the only sound in the world for a moment. That rhythmic click was steady and slow, like a metronome counting down to a truth long overdue. My coat moved with the wind. My hands were steady. My breath was even. But my heart, it beat with something I hadn't felt in years. Certainty. They saw me the moment I reached the edge of the driveway. My son blinked like he could not believe his eyes. My daughter-in-law's mouth fell open, mid-rant, but no words followed. I said nothing at first. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. From it, I drew one paper. Just one. The original deed. My name, my husband's name, my portion. 51%. I held it up without trembling. Then I looked at them, directly. For the first time in months, the woman you charged rent, I said softly, is the legal majority owner of this land. They were frozen. No one took it from me, I continued. No one tricked me. You tried, but you failed. You can't do this, my son whispered, his voice breaking. I already did, I replied. No anger, no shouting, just truth. The sheriff nodded beside me, then handed them the second page, the final order. You have until Friday to remove your belongings. My daughter-in-law turned to him, frantic. This is insane. We've lived here for years. Our name is on the mailbox. Mailboxes don't hold title, my lawyer said, stepping forward. Deeds do. And this one says she's still the legal majority owner. You had the chance to contest it. You chose not to. My son looked like he wanted to collapse, to melt into the porch we had once sanded together on a Saturday when he was 7. But I gave him nothing. Not a hand, not a word. I turned and walked back across the street without looking back. Behind me, the sheriff spoke again. We can offer assistance if needed with the move, but the clock starts now. I stepped onto the sidewalk. The early spring wind pushed against my coat. I inhaled, and I could smell the lilac bush that once stood outside the kitchen window. It wasn't blooming yet, but I would bring it back. They tried to erase me, but I had roots here, deep ones. Roots you cannot pull from the ground without breaking something sacred. As I got into my car, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. My daughter-in-law was sobbing on the porch. My son stood behind her, expressionless, hands limp by his sides. This was the same porch where I once handed him his first lunchbox, the same kitchen where I sewed the patch on his jacket, the same garden where I taught him how to hold a watering can, and now it was mine again. Not because I yelled, not because I begged, but because I never truly left. They laughed when I packed, but they cried when they saw who held the deed. And for the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me say, "Welcome home." The house is quiet now, not empty, quiet. The kind of quiet that feels earned, like the silence that comes after a long storm. A silence you do not fear, but welcome. A silence you tend to, like a final cup of tea at the end of a hard day. I wake up each morning to the light that filters through the same east-facing window my husband installed with bare hands. He measured it 3 times, cut the frame himself. I remember the sawdust in his hair, the proud smile when he finished it. That light still hits the same spot on the bedroom floor, casting warmth on the quilt I sewed when I was pregnant with our first. The garden is starting to bloom again. I planted marigolds first, his favorite. Bright gold, strong stems, resilient. They remind me of him. The roses will come in July, and with them the hummingbirds. I placed a feeder by the porch, just like we used to do. It took them 3 days to return, as if they had waited for me. The kitchen has its rhythm again. I keep the tea kettle polished, the counter clean, and the photo of him, smiling in the backyard, paint on his shirt, framed by the windowsill. It watches over me while I cook. Sometimes I speak to it, not always with words, but with glances, with pauses, with the way I rinse the tomatoes before slicing them. He loved the smell of fresh herbs. I do not invite people over. I do not need to. I do not brag to the neighbors. They do not know what happened, and I have no need to tell them. Not because I am hiding, but because what I did was not for spectacle. It was for me. Because this was never about proving anything. Not to them, not even to my son. It was about remembering who I was before they tried to make me forget, before they reduced me to a rent check, before they made me feel like a guest in my own legacy. Every brick of this home remembers me. Every floorboard knows my footsteps. Every nail was held in place by the calloused hands of a woman who built more than just a shelter. I built a life here, a family, a foundation. I did not reclaim this house for comfort, or power, or vengeance. I reclaimed it because it was always mine. Because when they laughed as I packed, they thought I was walking away. But I never left. Not really. They tried to erase me. But I had already written myself into every corner of this place. Into the garden, the walls, the warmth. My story is carved into the grain of the wooden beams, whispered through the cracks in the floorboards, tucked inside the seams of every curtain. I do not need them to thank me. I do not need them to change. I only needed them to know one thing. I was never weak, and I was never leaving. I just needed the right moment to come home. Now, I take my time. I journal in the mornings. Nothing grand, just reflections. Lists of what I see outside the window. Notes to myself. Letters I will never send. Some to my husband, some to the girl I used to be. I sit on the porch in the afternoons, sipping tea, watching birds, letting the sun warm my knees. Sometimes a neighbor waves. I nod. We exchange smiles. They think I am just a quiet old woman who loves her flowers. And they are right. They do not need to know the rest. At night, I read. I fall asleep with a lamp on. I let the heater run without asking anyone's permission. And in the dark, I feel not fear, but fullness. Because justice does not always arrive in a roar. Sometimes it returns in whispers, in locked doors, in fresh blossoms, in peace, and in the quiet satisfaction of knowing I am home, not because I demanded it, but because I never stopped deserving it. The first time I met Arthur, I was not looking for anyone. I was at the community center for a pottery class, something I had always wanted to try, but never had the time for. My hands were stiff that morning, and the clay felt too cold, too wet, too unfamiliar. I was ready to leave halfway through when he sat down beside me and said, "Most people quit before the second lump." I turned to him, eyebrows raised. "That's the secret," he said with a crooked smile. "The first lump's always ugly. It's the second one that teaches you patience." Arthur was in his early 80s, tall and wiry, with silver hair that curled over his ears and glasses always sliding down his nose. His hands were stronger than mine, though marked with old scars used to. Build boats, he told me. Not for a company, just for joy. Said the water always made him feel honest. We talked over lopsided bowls and awkward lumps of clay. He made me laugh without trying. He never complimented my looks, He complimented my observations, my way of seeing, my spine made of braided rope, as he once put it. I hadn't felt seen like that in decades. He never asked about my past. He waited until I told him. And when I did, about the house, the rent, the papers, the sheriff, the silence, he didn't flinch, just nodded, his hands resting calmly on his apron. "They underestimated you," he said, "and you still chose quiet over cruelty. That takes a kind of strength most folks don't understand." Arthur wasn't flashy. He brought me jam he made himself. He wore the same brown corduroy jacket even when it got warm. He liked crossword puzzles in pen and soup without salt. But he looked at me like I mattered, like my silence was full, not empty. Our friendship grew in rhythms. Tuesdays at pottery, Fridays at the farmer's market, Sundays in the garden. He helped me repair the birdhouse my husband once nailed to the maple tree. He sat with me on the porch during storms. He listened to the same stories more than once and never interrupted. One evening, as the sun sank low and the sky turned the color of ripe peaches, he reached for my hand. No big speech, no fanfare, just warmth, and something in me, something buried under years of being overlooked, opened. We didn't talk about marriage. We didn't need to. We talked about tomatoes and novels, Bach and blueberry pie. He showed me how to use a chisel. I showed him how to preserve herbs in oil. We built a bench together for the garden, carving our initials underneath like teenagers with secrets. He kissed my forehead every time he left, called me darlin' without making it sound like pity. He never asked to move in, but he brought over his favorite mug, and it stayed on my shelf like it belonged. Some evenings we danced slowly in the living room, no music, just the ticking of the old wall clock and the soft sound of two people choosing peace. My neighbors began to notice. One of them asked if he was my boyfriend. I laughed. I told her, "He's my beginning again," because that's what Arthur was. Not a replacement, not a rescue, a beginning. A reminder that it is never too late to be chosen with care. That even after the world bruises you, love can find you. Not because you need saving, but because you finally stopped hiding. Now, when I wake in the morning, there are 2 chairs at the table, 2 mugs, 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom. We keep separate beds, but fall asleep in the same room, reading quietly until one of us forgets the page. He calls me his wildflower, and I call him mine. So no, the story didn't end with the locks changing and the deed returned. It grew, it softened, he bloomed again, because sometimes justice is followed by joy, and sometimes, when the world thinks you're finished, you meet someone who sees you, not as broken or bitter, but as a woman still blooming, a woman still brave enough to love. Thank you for staying with me until the very last word. If this story stirred something in your heart, whether it was anger, recognition, or a quiet sense of justice, then you understand what many choose to ignore, that strength does not always raise its voice. Sometimes it signs a deed. Sometimes it closes a door without slamming it, and sometimes it sits quietly on a porch it reclaimed, sipping tea in the morning light, knowing it needs no applause. This was never just a story about a house. It was about dignity, about memory, about roots and rights and the soft power of endurance, about not asking for power, but reclaiming what was never truly lost. It was about standing up, not with fists, but with facts, with paper, with patience, and with pride. It was about every woman who has ever been told she was a burden, every grandmother made to feel like she was lucky to be allowed to stay, every matriarch asked to shrink herself in the very place she once built from nothing. If you saw yourself in my story, or saw someone you love, know this: you are not invisible, you are not small, you are not forgotten. You are the reason I tell these stories, because someone has to remember, someone has to speak, and someone has to remind the world that there is no expiration date on justice. If you believe the quietest women often carry the loudest truths, then I invite you to subscribe to Grandma True Stories. This isn't a channel about pity. It's a place for clarity, for closure, for courage. Here, we tell the stories no one else will. The ones whispered behind closed doors, the ones dismissed at family dinners, the ones that echo through the decades, waiting for someone to finally listen. We don't chase revenge. We don't scream. We remember. We reveal. We remind. And when a grandma speaks, the world listens. So if you want more stories like this, stories of resilience, of quiet justice, of real women with real voices, then click subscribe. Join a growing family that believes in truth without theatrics, in justice without judgment, and in strength that doesn't need permission to stand tall. Subscribe now to Grandma True Stories, because some stories need to be heard, and some truths once spoken can never be silenced again.